Keying. Keying is quintessential to animation. Anything in Maya can be animated, which is very overwhelming to a student. Case in point, I could grab a single vertices and dictate that this vertice is going to be here 1 second and then over here the next. Very cool stuff. I can go into this object and go into its properties for material and say it's going to be gray 1 second and it's going to be blue the next. And anything that I right click on, it says set key. Okay. So a keyframe is just a snapshot in time. In this case, I have 24 seconds. And I know that by going in here and saying it's playing in 24 frames per second. Okay, so this is 1 second long. That's what I mean by real time or 24 frames per second. Now you can dictate that these first 24 frames is going to be 1 second, which is very short. One, there, it's over with, right? So I would probably need a lot more seconds in order to be able to see my actual animation, or it's just going to be 1 second long. So if it's going to be 24, 48 would be 2 seconds. 10, 240. Okay, so you can see how that gets really, really out there very quickly. So if I put 240 frames right here, or seconds, that's 24 frames per second, so this is 10 seconds long. So do the math. Very important. So in 10 seconds, it's a very long time in animation. I'm just going to snarf that down a little bit to a couple seconds, or just play around with the idea that there is 48 for right now. And I'm going to show you how to scale up your keys. So how to set a key and what keys are. We got translate, rotate, and scale. We're gonna look at keying movement first before we key components. So on the first frame, I can hit S, and S dictates that everything is going to get keyed. That's not always practical, however. You know, you shouldn't think about keying everything. A lot of new students key everything. Later on, you're going to find that that's a very hurtful thing if you go to the timeline built into Maya or the graph editor. It gets really confusing. So if we want to get rid of that keyframe, there's a couple different ways to do it. One, we could go over here and highlight all these and right click on it and say break connections. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is go over here and right click and delete. Okay? If I want to set keys only on translate, it's Shift W. Again, if I want to get rid of those, I can right click and say break connections, or I can delete it over here. If I want to set keys only on rotates, I can hit Shift E. And Shift R is scale. Shift W, and you can see how these are blocking out. Again, I'm just going to go over here and delete it. It's good to know that you could break the connections, however, because let's say I want to only get rid of keying things and rotate. Well, if I had done this, let's say I hit Shift W and E, whoops. Okay, and I wanted to get rid of only the rotate. Well, there's no way to just delete rotate over here. It's delete the entire thing. That means that I'd have to know over here that you could break the connections. That's why it's important to know both ways to delete, in case you want to get rid of only one form of action. Alright, so the thing that gets taught the most within the first animation class ever is the fact that you can move an object from one set of time to another set of time. So in this case, let's move this sphere over here and hit Shift W. That will update this, and now the translate is negative 8.125. And then I'll move my time slider over, move my sphere over, and hit Shift W. Now if I scrub across the timeline in 24 frames, which is 2 seconds, if I hit play, there it goes. Ooh, right? Now if I wanted to make it a little bit more interesting, I can, on 24 frames, I can move this up and hit Shift W. Now you'll see if I hit play, it arcs over. Alright, let's say for instance, here I start out with Shift E, which is rotate, and then while it's up in the air, it starts to rotate. So I hit E on the keyboard, rotate it out a little bit, and hit Shift E, and then at the end, it rotates even more. Okay, let's look at that as far as an animation is concerned, and look at the wireframe to dictate, what it looks like as far as the rotation is concerned. Boom, up in the air, back down. Later on, I decide that I do not want it to be rotated. So in the center here, I would have to break that connection. And if I wanted it to go back to normal, I would have to put this back down to 0. There we go. It's no longer keyed. But my original keyframes are still set into place for the translate. Alright, now the good stuff. Hold Shift, click and drag across the timeline, and I get this. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit so I can see these little yellow arrows. Yellow arrows on the outside state that I can click and drag, and this will scale the timeline. So once at 60 frames or 48 frames, I can now squish it down to 10 frames. Also, if I click the middle arrows, I can move the entire keyframe set over. So instead of having it on 0 or 1 frame, I can go to 60 frames, and that's where it starts. Now, in this case, you're going to get it putting frames on odd places. Like now it's 87.0. We don't want that, so we right-click here. And in here we can snap. Snapping will allow it to not make stupid choices like half frames or 3/4 frames or any of those other things as we move it across. So hold Shift again. Okay, if I start going like this, that's not going to change. But when we scale it, that's when it's going to start snapping. Alright, well, that's keying 101. How to get rid of them, how to move them around, how to scale them. But this is a poor graphical interface for dealing with keyframes. So now we're going to look at the graph editor and how it works.